Woodhull has been in the Dayton market. My family has been in the copier, print, and office equipment industry for 75 years. My grandfather started in 1950.
There is a lot of value and respect in this business is not only generating, sustainability for my own family, but it is for how many other people.
And make sure that me as a person, me as Robert, understands who I am and who I want to be before I can task and ask other people to be more. No one will ever work as hard as the owner. You should never expect anybody in your organization to work as hard as the owner.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Next Gen Strategies podcast. Joining me, as always, Mr. Tyler Davis, and we have an excellent guest on today that we are super excited for, Mr. Robert Woodhull. And Robert, we'll let you kind of introduce yourself and tell the people a little about yourself and your company. Tyler and I are really excited because Robert is an entrepreneur, part of a family-owned business, and I think the listeners are going to have a really good time kind of listening to his story. And we're gonna try to stump him with some questions around business growth and things of the nature. So, Robert, welcome to the show, and we'd love to hear a little bit about you and your company.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, guys. And look forward to kind of just having a great conversation and seeing what kind of thoughts we come up with, and hopefully some of your listeners can benefit from, my learned experiences through lots of failure, right?
There you go. That's the best kind.
Again, Robert Woodhull, currently in the president role here at Woodhull LLC. Woodhull has been in the Dayton market, and my family has been in the copier, print, and office equipment industry for 75 years. My grandfather started in 1950 selling a product called the SoundScribe. It was the first dictation unit that business owners, executives would record their thoughts and statements into, pass off to their secretary for them to type up. About 2 years after my grandfather had started selling that, SoundScribe went out of business and was actually approached by 3M, who had recently developed the Thermofax, which was the first printer, heat transfer-based printer. And we're looking for a distribution and sales network. And so there's this dealer network that had been established because of the SoundScribe product. And that's how we got into into the office equipment and print side of things. Now, we've always been in office equipment, office technology, and supporting the workplace work. 2025 marks 75 years that my family's been in the industry and in Dayton. So background on me, I'm a lifelong Daytonian. I graduated from Chaminade Julienne, went to college in Miami, and graduated from University of Dayton.
Go Flyers. Sorry, I'll throw that out there.
Absolutely. For me, I started actually on the delivery truck about 12 years ago. So really at the time, it wasn't a long-term intention of sticking around. It was I'd blown out my knee and needed to do some sort of work and stay physically active. And I jumped on the delivery truck. And 12 years later and 7 roles later, my mother hasn't fired me yet. I'm doing something right. Because, I keep moving forward and up. And, I really appreciate the path that I took, that we had discussed, and that it really allowed me to understand all the different aspects of the business, really learn, from the bottom up. Delivery truck, trained all of our customers on the equipment. They sent me down to Cincinnati to sell because I guess it would have been too easy if I did it in my backyard. Dayton, and then moved into a marketing position, sales supervisor, trained all of our newest and onboarded all of our newest sales reps, business development role, and now in the president capacity. So,
yeah, I love the that was one of the things that Ty and I had kind of picked up when we had even, talked to you a little bit before this, was just you had kind of that interesting journey of like literally starting doing the deliveries up until, you're in the sales role and the marketing role, and kind of worked your way up. And, I think that that's something where we see a lot of business owners, business leaders, folks who, whether they're in the family-owned business or they made their way up through a business, like the really successful ones have kind of seen it from the ground up, even if it was, a little bit different for everybody. And, and so I think that's really cool. And, I don't know if from your perspective, but, some questions I have is just, what was that journey like? Like, you started off doing that, like you were looking to obviously kind of grow in a role. Like, what did that journey look like? You mentioned even some either aggravation or things you learned. So, kind of curious what that looked like, kind of going from where you were to where you are now.
Yeah. I mean, and, by the way, we threw in a pandemic and a supply chain
right
in the middle of that self-figuring it out and development, right? But it's an interesting dichotomy, right? It's the family nature and dynamic is something that can be a competitive differentiator, but it is family, right? We all know what happens when you're so close with someone and you spend this time. And so, there's these nuances, whether I had to overcome or redevelop communication, setting boundaries, right? All of it always is constantly going to drive around communication, solid communication. But I know, like, when I first started, I was eager, I was excited, but I do recall, like, there was a point where my mom was like, hey, someone needs to, like, intervene before Robert makes it to my office. Like, it just, first off, that's not how this works. Mm-hmm. And it also sets those boundaries and parameters that, Robert, you have a direct manager, and there's probably about 30 people above that direct manager. So you shouldn't be getting to me as fast as you are.
Yeah.
And, I say that in a comical way because it's just how we have to navigate that. Understanding things as I spent more and more time involved and started to move to careers is that whether you like it or not, there is a microscope on you and your actions. And whether you like it or not, somebody else's 90% that's acknowledged and rewarded, you have to do 115 to 120% because there's just this implicit idea that, well, it's the owner's son. Mm-hmm. And so my effort or sweat that needed to be put in needed to be seen even more so, right? I mean, I remember going through different leadership courses when I was a lot younger, and some of the people were in their 30s at the time. And they were asking questions like, how do I get people to listen? Because whether you agree or not, it seemed like a disservice that their family threw them into management positions in large organizations, right? When someone's, let's say, worked on a manufacturing floor for 25 years and this child of an owner is put into a management leadership role, I think that there's a certain acceptance and reality to someone who knows what they're doing, telling someone else who doesn't to kind of go to hell or to ignore them or not listen to them and keep doing the job that they know how to do. So when you see that question being asked and the look in their eyes is fear, you have to take in a real consideration of that's nice, but is it a disservice, right? And so I had to work harder. I had to put in more time. And I also had to accept that the standard is not equal or fair or even. And so I would say that, the biggest thing was understanding that it is natural for someone to say something to my face that's different than what they say to their manager behind closed door. Until I established, my work ethic and people saw what I was here to do and I showed up consistently. Yeah, I mean, that was a tough thing to figure out, right? Even having that dialogue with mom is that though she is a boss, any parent, they have issues probably taking off the parent hat, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, navigating that, right? Is she coming at me as my mom, or is she coming at me as an owner boss? You know, her making sure people aren't maybe taking advantage of me because they might say something thinking, is that going to get back to Susie?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's even defining skills that if I was to make a comment that I didn't think maybe my mom would stand behind, I had to be expressly clear that this is my thought and my thought alone, right? And even then you have some variances, but it's just about navigating that relationship, and it's all through communication, and it's understanding like misperceptions are just a reality, and the only thing that ever clears up misperceptions is our actions, right, and our follow through.
One of the things, you know, I'm really curious on, as you've kind of talked about like some of the things that you're learning, like from a professional development standpoint, and like just kind of becoming a leader, and you know, you've hit a ton of different things that, you know, I think really probably resonate with folks who are trying to build strong cultures and strong leadership teams, you know, establish leadership traits. But you're also in an industry, Robert, and I'd love for you to speak to this a little bit. Like, you've had to kind of reinvent the company a little bit and figure out ways to penetrate different markets and offer different services. And, you know, I'm kind of curious, like, what's been your approach there of like, you know, obviously you mentioned where the company started, where it's at today. Like, love for you to kind of touch on like, you know, how were you able to break down those doors, or what were those things that you maybe heard from customers or saw opportunities? Like, how did you manage that from a leadership level? How did you get people involved to, you know, kind of get behind you with those initiatives? Like, what did that look like from, you know, where you're going and where you continue to grow in?
Buy-in and messaging is always super important. But again, it's like, we have to remove the ego. So my mom doesn't listen to me, or, you know, Jim disregards me. Get over it. Like, to me, it's all about the win or getting that progress forward. So if I know that the person that has been a right hand to my mother for 35 years obviously has a better communication and rapport based on that long-term working relationship, and I get that individual to be receptive to my idea, and I know it's going to be better received if he shares that, you know, then terrific. We're still accomplishing the goal. I don't need my name on it. You know, I think that's a hindrance to progress. It's disingenuous to the responsibility of your role, whether it's, again, middle leadership or top leadership. Our job is to remove speed bumps, give people answers, directions, so that they can move forward and do their job to the best of their ability. It's not the alternative. So whatever path helps that forward, that's what works. So, you know, for new technologies or new products, patience is the best tool, simply put, right? Yeah. Is that it takes time to go over these things. You have to understand, you know, in a 75-year business, 20 years ago, a 3-month run rate on decision was okay. It's little tweaks that you have to do. Like, are we looking to software implementation and that supporting our current employee or our current headcount, the current team we have, rather than just adding more bodies to an issue, right? It's those little evolutions. It's that we've always had a strong culture. We've always reinforced that strong culture of service and teamwork. But culture is a finicky thing, and it's a lot more sensitive, I think, sometimes than we think.
Maybe you have a one of the things that you're touched on as well is culture, and do you have maybe, and I'll ask you, like, do you have a story maybe, or, you know, a time where you were like, you know what, like, I've got to make a decision. Maybe it was you, maybe it's somebody else, or maybe something happened where you're like, this is us, like, this is who I want to be, or where you're like, I had to make a decision because I knew the importance of the culture and I had to make a pivot. Like, you know, any stories that you can think of, any times where you're like, you know what, like, this is kind of a defining moment, like maybe, you know, whatever that kind of looked like as you know, the company's evolved.
Yeah, I would say, you know, usually in those moments, it's hard to know again, I made that joke about failure in the beginning.
Yeah.
I find it's easier to pivot when I've messed up big time, because then I know I'm not going to go down that path again. I always ask incredibly successful people, how do you maximize on success? Because usually you don't realize you're having this really good month, year, or run until it's over. Whereas we always know when we don't do well, right? So for me, it's accepting when we fail and then responding to it simply from kind of that, what was the moment that said, hey, whoa, this isn't working out well. It's a response to me messing up in the first place.
Sure.
But as far as like moments that help me understand the culture, it's when people over the last 12 years, or when I'm out in the field and run into somebody that used to work for my grandfather or something, those are the moments that help me define the culture, legacy, and then the style I want to propagate and move forward, right? So, when I was early in my career and employees talking about how when they're out in the field talking to a customer, they truly feel that they are given the autonomy to represent the company.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had said that they were a direct reflection of Susie Woodhull's ownership. That's a powerful statement.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the only way that people adopt that kind of mindset, or at least how that culture was created, was based on, love and admiration. The willingness of an employee to put in that extra time, or again, the feeling that they are a representation of ownership, is not because we're running a Stalin-like environment over here.
Sure.
Where it's black and white, no, yes, right? It's because I have been so fortunate to witness what my mother's leadership has resulted in and the impact it's had on the individuals and employees. And that is a continuation of what my father did and what my grandfather did. I mean, I remember 5 years ago, a guy interviewed for a production role, and he told me that he had started for my grandfather when he was 18 years old. My grandfather called him into his office and he was like, I don't know what's going to happen, right? I feel like I'm going to get in trouble. My grandfather asked him what was going on with this customer. Why was there an issue still going on? And, the 18-year-old tech looked at me and said, he's using really bad paper. My grandfather picks up the phone. I think it happened to be generally, not a Jess customer. I think probably a little bit of a friend too.
Yeah.
But he said, John, what the hell kind of paper are you putting through my machine? You're like, it's funny, it's silly and all those things. But when that person told it to me, what he was telling me was a story of advocacy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What he was telling me was a story where his boss, when he thought he was going to get in trouble, did the opposite and protected him. And just carry that story 30 years later, that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I have a question. Since you've kind of had this lived experience spending, I'm assuming, the most part of your career in the family business, what are your thoughts, I guess, if it were to be your child to come through Woodhull? I've heard people talk about, do you have, this person, if they do want to work, there, start right away? Or is it advantageous for them to go enter the workforce and spend some time somewhere else to see how work is somewhere else and maybe bring fresh ideas in? Or are they just missing out on time and opportunity inside the family business? I kind of would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And there's never one answer, right? There's multiple ways to skin that cat. Because I've seen it done both ways. The whole point of the bottom line is establishing credibility and not just being served something due to relationship and last name.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you go work out in corporate world for 5 years before you join that family team, or you start from scratch and work your way up. The important underlining theme message, and that is it's all earned, not given. And so we establish those credibilities one way or another, right? Mine was purely like labor route, moving through it.
Yeah.
And also like addressing my own things, right? So, there came a point where my, out of work choices, from having beverages at night was having an effect on my work life. And so, family dynamics it crosses over, right? So you can't hide stuff sometimes, but ultimately it came down to a self-choice, right? Anything we end up doing when it really sticks is because we choose to do it. And I had to have a moment with myself and say, if I want to be this leader and I want to pursue this opportunity that I have to work for that's in front of me, I can understand that if I was in a leadership position, it is not fair to the 80 plus employees to be concerned about what state Robert's going to show up in the next morning. And that's fair, right? Yeah. And so for me, in that degree, work's given me a great deal of purpose. It's given me an outlet to find the best me. And I think it's seldom in larger corporate environments would I even be given an option and plan, but it's all based on not putting my mother in a position where I gave her a difficult choice to make.
One of the things that I've seen you talk about recently too, Robert, is this, as you've grown and the company has grown and you're into the role that you're in now, and you've touched on culture, you've touched on like you're not where you're at if it wasn't for the team around you and the folks that have done these things through the year. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what has kind of come up recently, and that is, becoming an ESOP, because that is a very cool thing. And I think that seems to be, at least for me, a little bit of the kind of cherry on top of some of the things that you're saying, because now it's like, it's bigger than one person. There's a lot of ownership. And so anyway, I'd love for you to kind of touch on like what led to that decision, how you're excited about this. I'd love for you to talk a little about that.
Yeah, of course. It is really exciting, and it's really cool. It's back to that action thing, right? It's not talk. This is action. This is real, right? These are real feelings. This is real care for the employees and what we actually do as a team. And I showed up after a lot of these people had been here a long time and created something that was quite special. I'm indebted to those people and what they did to support my mother create this company and this thing. And, you talk about next gen strategies, you talk about succession and family business. There are a lot of different ways to approach that. And I think that there was a part where my mother said, my mother's hat on, I don't know if I can burden you with the responsibility of this purchase alone as a mother, right?
Sure.
And I think there's also, we all go through these learned experiences. So what happened in our, previous and in the past does affect our decisions moving forward. When my dad bought the company from his father, my grandfather passed away shortly after. There weren't purchase contracts, right? Mm-hmm. There wasn't some timetable of payout. It was a discussion that was organic and family oriented. But if that person who helped come to that agreement passes away, there starts to become murky areas and cloudy things, and maybe like it has not always the best impact on the whole family dynamic. Mm-hmm. And then when my parents sold, to a roll-up, it was Icon Office Solutions at the time, and a lot of the way they sold the company, a lot of that stuff was stock and things like that. And then to be doing double-digit growth compared to all other offices and to be let go and the company to like really tank, then all the effort and hard work there was lost. And so a lot of, I think, what spurred what we ended up doing was obviously past experiences, was also me removing the ego. My fundamental job here is to support my mother, because that's how we work as a team. And that's how she can move and make the best decisions, is when you can make hard decisions when people are there to support you and are behind you in that decision, no matter what it is. And that's where we started with all this. And we both watched this 60 Minutes that was talking about private equity firms buying up companies and either converting them to ESOP or buying up companies and they stayed ESOP. I've had the privilege of knowing a lot of employee-owned companies. And we came in on a Monday morning and said, "Did you see that?" And she goes, "I did see that. I think we should talk about that again." And we felt that the company was in a good place, strong leadership team, strong future opportunities. And so we went down that path. The part that always resonated with me was, again, one of those guest speakers or something said, no one will ever work as hard as the owner. You should never expect anybody in your organization to work as hard as the owner.
Mm-hmm.
Because the owner is the only one that understands the 2 more hours or the doing the research on this new healthcare plan, all of those things. Only they are going to understand that. But there's this bigger picture, there's this bigger opportunity, and there's this goal beyond the initial pay. And I thought about that a lot. And remember, at the beginning of my career, people were saying, I feel like I'm a reflection and representation of Susie Woodhull in ownership. So that mindset was already kind of embedded in who we are. But I accepted that as a challenge because I can tell you, starting on the delivery truck and making what I made on the delivery truck, if I did not have this future opportunity or goal in mind, there's plenty of days that might have just ended there, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, challenge accepted. You're telling me that we could provide people with the potential of generational wealth. We could provide people with an opportunity at a better life than what their parents offered them. And then you can make 80 owners thinking like owners, working like owners, driving like owners. I've had this thought for a long time, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. The second you assume a leadership role is almost the second you should be thinking about your out strategy. That's succession planning. That's next gen strategy. Not saying, cool, I'm going to ride this out for 30 years and then start thinking about it.
Right.
Yeah, I love the employee-owned company thought process. It seems like maybe we just had a gap in time over the last few decades where that wasn't available. Because if you look at some of the businesses and industries through the 80s and 90s that had that participation in that, you're right. There were employees who essentially just had a skill and what they were good at that business and were able to build generational wealth or build value in a meaningful way because they also, bet on the business and invested in that program. Mm-hmm. And, you see it in my space, in the accounting space, the partnership model is so prevalent, and you're seeing private equity come in and make a change in that space as well with these employee options. And I'm a huge fan of it. And we've talked a couple times about it as a part of, next gen strategies of what these options could be versus what we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and you talked earlier, if I had a child and they eventually wanted to or were thinking about working in the business, my mom we told the employees, she goes, so Robert buys it. And then what? You're just kicking the bucket down the road. Mm-hmm. And again, it's so much more than me and my mom. It's not. Again, my responsibility is to be here and to serve and support, guide and offer. And I'm envious that my grandfather could do that with just a salary. But what are we doing, right? We live in these communities, we function in these communities. And if we aren't aspiring to make every aspect of them more, then I don't know what we're doing. The greatest generation, they came home, they built businesses to build communities. They didn't do it to simply build personal wealth. Mm-hmm. That was a byproduct of supporting their family. That's what they did. I can assure you, my grandfather didn't start Woodhull in 1950 because he was adamant about buying some 200-foot yacht.
Right.
It's like, holy shit, I'm not enlisted anymore. I have 4 children and a wife and a house and a mortgage. We got to do something here. And I don't want to work at NCR. Mm-hmm. So that was, that's literally how it kind of opened the door. He was like, I tried that, don't want that. And the purchase actually ran into a guy in an alley who was upset. And he asked him what was wrong. He's like, I got to sell this business or something like that. And it all came to fruition. So
Your philosophy reminds me of a video I just seen where the guy was talking about 3 kind of things that he was aspiring to in his business. And one was, like making his first $1 million. And then his second one was making someone in his business $1 million, And so like when you're talking about, like there is a lot of value and respect in like this business is not only generating, sustainability for my own family, but it is for how many other people. Mm-hmm. And his last one was then give away $1 million, So I just thought it was your philosophy as you're looking at this and talking community and talking employees, it reminds me of that thought process a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a cool one. I like that. Those are like goals, and those are like goals for the soul, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's we can't push value and talk about value for 20 years and then not practice that internally, right? And that's what we all want. We're looking for kind of greater value.
For sure.
And either if it's greater value in long-term security financially or greater value in like programs and benefits you're offering, or sometimes just being flexible because life happens and someone's kid gets sick. And at 3:00, they need to go because other parent is working, can't get out. We can do that. Now, I do think sometimes individuals make that more difficult, right? It's ironic that the same person that complains about not being a family company anymore is also the same person that doesn't let me make individual decisions for individuals. So if I do, hey, whoa, are we all getting 2 hours off? No, it's a one-off thing. And then I gotta go make policies and procedures and all these things. And I'm like, this too many rules. And like, there weren't any.
Oh gosh.
But I think that's where some withhold, and I say, you got to do the opposite. Open up with a more than. That means that we have not communicated enough what we're trying to do.
Yeah, what's nice about that too is that when you give, you can also take, right? So, the person that you're giving that flexibility to tends to remember that and not mind giving back when things get tough, like that extra hour at the job site, mm-hmm. or not watching the clock. Oh, it's 5. I'm out of here, because the flexibility is a give and take mm-hmm. and that works out quite well in my experience.
Robert, I just want to say, as we're, kind of wrapping up here, like I at least personally, like really have appreciated you kind of talking through, like just from your perspective, like the journey that, you've been on, as well as just the family dynamic, how the company has changed over the years. I think, a lot of our listeners are kind of in a couple of different buckets. One, they're the ones that maybe where your mom is at. And they're like, what am I doing with this business? Is there opportunity within the family? Is there other partners, outside investors? I'm kind of getting to this, side of life where I'm looking for like what that next step is. A lot of our listeners are folks who are like you, who are, either they were in the family or they've been a part of a business and they've watched the business grow and they've been an integral part. And they're like, now how do I take that next step? And so I think this has just been really insightful and kind of raw and authentic, but just talk about the things and the thought process and, just really appreciate you kind of sharing that story. And, to kind of close with this, I'd love, where for listeners who maybe want to learn more about, Woodhull or what you do, or where can they find you? Where can they find you personally? Like where should they go?
Yeah. So our website's woodhullusa.com. You can kind of get a tour, learn all about us, get a background in history. You can very much easily find me on LinkedIn because, that's the professional Rolodex. I can't even imagine. I don't know why people. It's crazy. Some people don't leverage that, but I'm very open. How do you run a business if you aren't approachable? How do you find good people or sell products if you aren't available? How do you offer good service if you don't pick up the phone? Right. So I'm out there. But yeah, woodhullusa.com, how to learn more. it's pretty simple. We do everybody's favorite office topic, copiers, right? Never heard any.
Yeah, I just appreciate that. It's a little bit of a change of pace for us because we get a little tactical, and this is one of the episodes we're not talking cash flow, taxes, or marketing, but really more culture and values. And I think it's a great episode to air right after we had a team building episode before this. So I think it's a great little segment into more of the softer sides and kind of philosophical thoughts about that. So I really appreciate that, Robert.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think they're all intertwined, right? But if people are happy to be here and inspired to be here, those bottom line issues, numbers, they kind of like fall in place a lot better than if you were like trying to run it the opposite way around. Make it fun, right? Make it creative.
There we go.
I did 3 startups in college, so I understand the entrepreneurial plight. I understand the point where you have to acknowledge it's not working or it is working, and that's hard. Oh my gosh, that's hard. But all of it is for the benefit of what's next. None of it's lost value. Again, I'll end with my greatest value has come from my greatest failures.
Thanks again for joining us today on the Next Gen Strategies podcast.
Be sure to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you really enjoyed it, give us a share on any of your favorite social media channels.
And don't forget to leave us a review.